Well, Western Australia is the first state in the nation to shut its borders as the threat of coronavirus impacts on our economy and way of life. But for the mining and resources industry in Western Australia and in most parts of the nation, it's still business as usual. So, how pivotal is it that our mining and resources sector keeps ticking over amid this pandemic? To give us his thoughts, we're joined by WA's Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Energy and Industrial Relations, the Honourable Bill Johnston. Minister, thanks for joining us on Small Caps.
No worries, Peter. Good to be here.
Now, we're effectively in a lockdown, but our mines and resources and gas sector is still running. Just how vital is that?
The resource sector is absolutely vital to Western Australia, but also to the nation. It supports our export, our foreign earnings, and allows the country to operate.
And look, just to put into perspective, Bill, in dollar terms, what does WA's mining and resources sector contribute to the national economy?
We have over $160 billion of exports from Western Australia's resource industry, over half the total resource exports in Australia, and it's key to our continuing economic success in Australia everywhere.
What feedback are you having from companies in terms of the impact of COVID-19 right now on mining operations?
So at the moment, COVID-19 is not impacting output, but it's clearly having other major impacts on the industry. People are moving to longer swings for FIFO work to reduce the number of transport movements. They're introducing very strict social distancing policy at work camps, and they're working very hard on their pandemic plans to make sure that the virus won't spread amongst work groups.
Yeah, so the movement of workforces into mining operations has been a little bit tricky logistically, I would assume, from the mining company's point of view. But for are FIFO or FIFO, fly-in, fly-out workers, exempted from quarantine measures at the moment?
They're not exempted from quarantine, but they are permitted to cross the border into Western Australia. But that's only if the specific skills are not available here in Western Australia. And if they do cross the border, then they still have to go into quarantine before they go to worksite. We are, of course, exempting workers travelling across our internal West Australian borders that we've established. But again, the reduction in movement is very important to our management of the pandemic.
Yeah, okay. So if there is an outbreak of COVID-19 in mining operations, will you entertain the thought of shutting that operation down?
We'll always respond to any development. We are doing our best to keep COVID-19 out of workplaces. If there was to be an individual worker who was caught with the affliction on site, then there are actions to be taken by the company. The first thing would be to evacuate the worker to hospital or other care, and then isolate the work group. We'd then have to see what we do with the work site. But clearly, the first effort is to prevent COVID-19 getting into a work camp.
All right, if we go to the broader scale, your federal counterpart in Federal Resources Minister Keith Pitt was quoted this week in a national newspaper that this pandemic will effectively lead to more and more residential workforces, that FIFO or FIFO, the reliance on fly-in, fly-out workforces will be reduced. Do you agree with him that, given this is something most remote and regional communities have been crying out for, that will possibly lead to more and more residential-based workforces once we're on the back end of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, look, I think the issue of FIFO in Western Australia is a bit different to the East Coast because many operations are extremely remote and there are no, apart from the Aboriginal communities, and we do encourage mining companies to hire from their Indigenous communities, but otherwise they're very remote and there's not really a practical way you can do anything other than fly in, fly out. On the other hand, for those mines that are closer to established communities, we have always called for companies to give people more choice so that if people want to live residentially, they can, and those who choose the FIFO lifestyle can choose that. So we're very much about focusing on the needs of working people and making sure that companies are giving people a genuine choice about their lifestyle.
Okay, so it sounds like for now and in the foreseeable future, irrespective of the impact of COVID-19, once it's done with, whenever that might be, that you're saying, I'm hearing you pretty much say that you can't see it changing. You can't see too many wholesale changes right now.
Well, what I'm saying is that companies should be giving workers more choice. They should be giving more flexibility in the rostering arrangements, and they should be giving more flexibility in the where they accommodate themselves. I mean, I'm concerned when I hear about mining companies insisting on workers doing fly in, fly out from Perth, rather than allowing drive in, drive out, say from Port Hedland, if that's a closer community. There shouldn't be a inflexibility of employers to prevent people living in regional communities if that's their choice. So we want to focus on the needs of individual workers.
Can we just talk about exploration companies, specifically in the junior to mid-tier space? Is there any state or federal funding applicable to junior explorers who do employ people but can't carry out their work due to the virus? Are you familiar with any kind of rebates or special funding packages available for that exploration market and space?
There's two things there. Firstly, in respect of the explorers here in Western Australia, we've announced a special direction, the first time it's ever been used for me as a minister, to all my delegates at the department, to effectively say that for the next year, we accept that they're not going to be able to meet their expenditure obligations. And so whilst they'll still need to complete their Form 5, if they can provide, if they provide the evidence that COVID-19 has prevented them working the country, they will be given an expenditure exemption. So that's worth, a very considerable amount of money to the junior explorers, so they won't have to run down their balances during this difficult period of time. In respect of those businesses that are providing services to the exploration sector that are going to be impacted by that reduction in expenditure, well, they're obviously able to access the Commonwealth Government JobKeeper payments and other government assistance. And of course, here in Western Australia, we've got a whole range of assistance for small business and small and medium enterprises through supporting them directly by paying electricity bills in Western Australia for companies that are using less than 50 megawatt hours of electricity a year, plus a range of rebates on payroll tax.
Okay, all right. So some good news for small businesses and for the explorers as well. I'm sure that'll be music to their ears, particularly for those in that exploration space. Let's talk post COVID-19, Bill. There's talk that China's economy could be up and running again by the end of June. What will that mean for Australia and for WA?
Well, obviously, China is a very key economic partner for the Western Australian resources industry. So if they come back strongly, well, that will obviously benefit us. We've been lucky that iron ore volumes have remained fairly steady, even at the height of the health problems in China. And that has meant that there's been quite some strength in the iron ore price, and we're very pleased by that. And we'd hope that we can continue to be a strong partner for our Asian economic partners and continue to provide raw materials to support their economic growth.
Obviously, with your crystal ball in front of you, do you think trade relations between WA/Australia and China will be different after this pandemic, or will it be a case of carry on as you go?
Well, I mean, we have a strong trading relationship with China because it's in our mutual interest. China needs resources, and we are a great low-cost provider of resources. We are, a very efficient mining operation here in Western Australia and energy operation, so we can provide raw materials and other needs, energy needs to China and our other Asian partners at a world price because we're very competitive.
Do you think that now is the time perhaps to forward plan and for Australia as a whole to perhaps start developing its own materials and bring back more manufacturing, revitalising the manufacturing industry. If it's one thing perhaps that we're seeing is that perhaps we need to invest within as opposed to relying outside our nation. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, look, I'm not here to develop a national government industry strategy, but what I would say is that the COVID-19 has demonstrated the need to have strong multiple supply and logistics chains. We, in the battery space, we're very strongly of the view that further processing of raw material here in Western Australia is a good business case. And one of those reasons is that it would allow the users of those materials to have a security of supply of rather than only being through one logistics chain. So we do think that there's a strong reason for the continued chemical processing of battery materials, and we've been talking to a range of investors globally about those opportunities, and we think that the COVID-19 has strongly endorsed the challenges of relying on one logistics path. So we do think that there's a real opportunity for investment in that further processing of battery materials here in Western Australia for supply of potential domestic users, but also for partnering with a whole range of countries around the world for their electric vehicle responses.
Let's talk about the long-term commodities. Gold, for instance, it's right now is on the up and seems to be the safe haven, and usually so when there's a geopolitical instability. We've got many gold operations here in WA. Can we and should we consolidate on that, given the high US and Australian gold price?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that gold continues to be a very strong sector. Of course, the gold price continues to increase in the whole time that I've been minister, and I'll continue to watch that happen. Western Australia is obviously uniquely placed to replace production that's declining elsewhere. We're very confident that we'll continue to find gold here in Western Australia. There's lots of exploration opportunities. I know that there's talk sometimes about a cliff, but we're very confident that there will continue to be continuing discoveries here in Western Australia that will ensure that we continue to be a strong producer of gold into the future. And there's clearly lots of opportunity for investors in that space here in Western Australia, and we would hope that we'll continue to receive high levels of investment into the gold sector over the next number of years.
All right, and just lastly, I referred to your crystal ball earlier. What does your crystal ball tell you in terms of when we might get out of the woods as far as COVID-19 is concerned?
Well, it's not going to be quick. This is a terrible disease. There are thousands of people, tens of thousands of people dying around the world because of COVID-19. We can't take any chances. We need to make sure that we're following the proper health advice, social distancing, staying at home. Believe it or not, wash your hands. Don't sneeze on the person sitting next to you. These things that might seem very simple, they are actually what's going to help us defeat this disease. And if we keep doing that, then who knows what the future holds. But I know that Australians are hardy people, and that we'll get the economy running as quickly as we can once we've dealt with the COVID-19.
Well, if it's one thing that we've learned in 2020, it's definitely to wash your hands. Bill Johnston, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us on Small Caps today.
Always happy to do so. Thanks, Peter.